A raw cut onion cannot stay overnight unless the root is still attached to the onion, in which case it's fine. Or if someone added something to it like salt or oil. If it's an egg, you need the shell on. Any egg, raw or cooked, it doesn't make a difference. If it's out of its shell, it needs something else in it, like salt or oil or a piece of the shell. But if you peel the eggs, nothing's on them overnight, you got a problem. This week is the Torah portion of Re'eh, many verses of this Torah portion is on the idea of kosher, the animals you can eat and cannot eat. I thought it would be very appropriate to talk about such a significant topic like kosher. At one point when you heard it, you might have been holding in one place and certain things you absorbed, and now you might be holding in a different place and other things you're going to absorb. First, a fascinating point about kosher animals, and this is another expression that we can see with our physical eyes of how all of Torah is divine. Not that we need proof, but when we see it, it's always meaningful. They have found that there's actually a physiological difference between animals that are kosher and animals that are not, which is quite cool to think that we can literally see something in the structure of the animal if it's kosher or not. And it really connects to the divine concept of the ritual slaughtering of a kosher animal, meaning for an animal to be fit for consumption by a Jew, it's a mammal that has split hooves and chews its cud. But even if this is cow meat or goat meat or sheep meat, deer meat, it's not necessarily meaning you can eat it, even though all of those animals have split hooves and chew their cud, because also the animal has to have the proper shechita, the proper slaughtering of the animal. The shechita, the ritual slaughtering of the animal, moves the animal, it shifts it and elevates it to be spiritually digestible to a Jew. And this is through making a cut with a very sharp knife at a certain point, severing the arteries in the front of the animal. Now, what's fascinating is at the base of the brains of all mammals, there's a ring of blood vessels and arteries. The central station for all the blood that flows through the body goes through this ring and then goes to the brain. Humans have something similar, but in animals, I call it the riti mirabli. By ritually, called a shaykh, is making a very sharp cut through the carotid arteries, which are the arteries on the front side. We might view it as the underside of the animal, which is the central route carrying the blood from the body through the neck to the brain. Severed. Instant blood flow to the brain stops. The blood pressure of the animal drops. The animal loses consciousness within 2 seconds or sooner. The knife is very sharp. The cut is very quick. Immediately loss of consciousness, which really makes the slaughtering as pain-free as possible and also causes all this blood to flow out of the body of the animal. Now, these arteries carry the blood to the brain from the front side of the neck. But in animals, there's also arteries at the back of the neck, near the vertebrae of the spine. And they also link to the base of the brain. So you could say, wait a minute, how does this ritual slaughtering work? The ritual slaughtering is cutting the front of the neck. How is this preventing the animal from suffering? The front of the neck, all that blood flowing to the brain gets cut off, but all the arteries in the back, they're not cut during the slaughtering. And then the animal actually shouldn't have a tremendous drop in blood pressure. The animal shouldn't lose consciousness. The animal will actually experience pain until it dies. So this is a cool, amazing fact. All mammals have front and back arteries, but animals with split hooves that chew their cud, meaning all kosher animals, have a different structure in the arteries in the back of their neck than non-kosher ones. By a non-kosher animal, a pig, a horse, the arteries are separate. The front arteries and the back arteries never connect, and separately they go to the central station of the brain. And therefore, if you cut the front of the animal, the back blood is still flowing and the animal wouldn't have this drop in blood pressure and wouldn't lose consciousness and would have blood flowing through his body and would experience a lot of pain. But in kosher mammals, only in the kosher ones, the rear arteries connect to the front arteries, and then together they're going to the brain. So only in kosher animals, all the blood is basically coming from the frontal arteries. So when the slur makes this sharp, quick cut in the front arteries, he is cutting off the blood to the brain. And that's why the blood pressure drops. That's why the animal loses consciousness and passes away so quickly and without the pain. And that's why all the blood should gush out of the animal from that cut. I thought this was doubly amazing. First of all, in creating a system with as pain-free slaughtering as possible. And that literally there's a difference in the circulatory systems of animals, literally dividing along the lines of kosher, not kosher. That's what changes the circulation in these animals. We know God and his divine wisdom is precise on every level, but it's another affirmation of that precision. It's just another affirmation like, wow. A similar example of this type of concept, the blood clotting factor in a human is at its highest on the 8th day from life. When a person is born, it builds, it gets over 100% on the 8th day, and then it drops back down to what becomes the 100% level. So the 8th day, the day a male child is circumcised, the blood clotting is at the highest you'll ever have it your entire life. Did God do this because the 8th day of the circumcision? It all works together. It's all a reflection of God's energy. It's another wow affirmation of how incredibly precise and divine it all is. Before we get into the technicals, on a spiritual level, to understand that anything that God forbade us, any animal, any bird, any fish that's forbidden, we are told has negative character traits that we would absorb if we could eat them. When we eat as God wants us to, our food, which becomes our body, is as per his instructions. Our very physical body is becoming big, and it really affects us. It affects our mind, our heart, and our sensitivity to God, our sensitivity to Torah. And of course, within kosher, there's always ways to do it better. So I'll start with what I'm calling upgrades, assuming there's a baseline of kosher, ways to improve. You keep kosher, but there's ways for it to be better. The first thing is not an upgrade. You really need to do this for it to be kosher. This is true for anyone that's going to move in kosher in any direction. Like you don't keep kosher at all, well, this will be a good place to start. And it's in terms of meat. We were just talking about the kosher animals and the coolness of the mammals, how literally their circulatory system is different, kosher and non-kosher ones. So within a kosher animal, as I said, like a cow or a sheep or a goat, you can't just go to Jewel and if you buy cow meat, yeah, it's kosher. The original cow was kosher, but because it wasn't ritually slaughtered properly and the blood didn't drain out properly and they didn't salt it and wash it properly, it is not fit. Kosher actually means fit. It is not fit for a Jew to eat. It is not kosher. So we have our cow or our sheep or our goat, and it went through the ritual slaughtering and salting and washing and rinsing and soaking and all that stuff. Now we're saying it's kosher. Kosher again means fit. It's fit for a Jew to eat. And spiritually, we view this whole process as shifting the energy of the animal. Obviously, a horse or a pig, you can't shift its energy. But a cow that you can shift still has to be shifted to be something that can be consumed and utilized by a Jew. So we have this animal, the cow, ritually slaughtered. That in of itself still doesn't make it kosher. For the meat to be kosher, it cannot have a physical defect that would limit the animal's life. Meaning, it's a kosher animal, it's a cow. It was properly slaughtered and salted, but it still might not be kosher. The most common invalidating defect is a punctured lung. So every animal that is ritually slaughtered is examined to make sure there's no holes or defects in the lungs. If there are, not kosher. Yes, it's a cow. Yes, it was ritually slaughtered, not kosher. Defect in the lung, within a year it would die. That's already called not kosher. But then there's another level, which is, besides holes in the lungs, they also check, is there scar tissue, adhesions that develop on the lungs? Why? Because if there's a scar tissue, if there's something that seems like an adhesion on the lungs, this could indicate that there was a hole that didn't heal properly or a hole that's developing. Most adhesions on the lungs means the animal's not kosher. Now, within this, it splits between Sephardic Jewry, the Jews of Spain and Portugal and Africa and Asia, Greece and Italy, all those areas around the Mediterranean, the Sephardic communities, and the Ashkenazi communities in France and Germany and Poland and Russia and England. The Sephardic communities see an adhesion on the lungs, not kosher. The Ashkenazi communities sometimes would test yes or no, but by now, we basically don't test either, because most of the time when you test, it's not kosher anyway. So when you look at an animal, cow, check, split hooves, chooses cud, ritually slaughtered, but you see adhesions on the lungs, most rabbis would say not kosher. This standard of if there are adhesions on the lungs, we reject it, is called glatt. Glatt is a word in Yiddish, which means smooth. So glatt kosher literally means an animal whose lungs are smooth and free of adhesions. And we're not relying on these tests that yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Now, any reliable kosher meat is glatt kosher. If you would find meat that says it's kosher and it's not glatt kosher, it's probably not reliably kosher either. So if you're trying to make sure your meat is kosher, you always would want it to be glatt kosher. Now, in Chicago, in the general CRC standard, all meat that's sold in the stores has to be glatt kosher. If it's already sold as Orthodox kosher meat, it's going to be glatt kosher. Because if it's not glatt kosher, it's probably not kosher. There are throwbacks of pretend kosher companies that aren't kosher. They don't have a O or OK or any of the standard kosher certifications. And they would claim they're kosher, but not glatt kosher. But if you ever see meat that says it's kosher, but it doesn't say glatt kosher, it's probably not kosher, because it's way too rare that the adhesion is actually kosher. So if you're not already going to be glatt kosher, we don't really assume you're kosher. So that was the first thing. Now, some assorted kitchen details that are things when you're running a kosher kitchen, some things you might or might not be aware of. If you have a kosher kitchen, you have a meat section and a dairy section, unless you are a vegetarian or you don't use any dairy, it's only meat. You don't use any meat, it's only dairy. But most people that eat both, you have a meat area, you have a dairy area. And very rarely does someone also have what we call a hariv area. Hariv means the food is not meat, which means it's not meat or fowl. It's not meat, bird, chicken, and it has nothing to do with milk. It's not dairy, like a tomato. So that's part. A tomato you can have with your meat, you can have with your dairy. Not together, of course, but a tomato is part. It can be used in either category. It's neutral, neuter. It's not dairy, it's not meat. Some items that are, in essence, part absorb the characteristic of the meat or the dairy if they are cut with a knife of either gender. What are those items? Items that are sharp: onions, garlic, radishes, lemons, any other sharp tasting raw vegetable that I missed. All of those items are sharp enough that if they are cut with a meat knife, they become meat category, even though it's an onion. Or conversely, if they're cut with a dairy knife, they would become dairy. So as someone who has a kosher kitchen, you would want at the least, besides your meat section, if you have meat, and your dairy section, if you have dairy, you would want at least a knife and cutting board that's hariv. Now, you could not, and just if you cut the onion with your meat knife, it's meat. And if you cut the onion with your dairy knife, it's dairy. And that's fine too, unless you're having fish with these onions, because fish we don't want with dairy and we don't want with meat. So it would be a problem. The safest thing is you have a knife and cutting board that's hariv. And the only time you really need to use it is if you're cutting any of those sharp vegetables like the onions or the radishes or the garlic or a lemon, something that would draw out the energy of the knife and would absorb it. Again, if I cut my onion with a meat knife, that's fine, but only with meat, not with fish or not with dairy. And if I cut it with a dairy knife, it's fine. But don't eat it not with fish and not with meat. So a lot of times it's simpler, especially if, for example, it's Shabbos and your first course is going to be fish and salads, that you have a parva knife and a parva cutting board. I try to have a very distinct color. So it's very clear because it's so easy for someone to get into my kitchen and mess up my parva knife or my parva cutting board. Over the years, I've tried to get more and more very distinct color. I right now have these lime green knife and lime green matching cutting board. Whenever I take out my parva knife, as soon as I finish using it, it's washed, dried, and put away. I don't want anyone to get confused. Now, another specificity about an onion, this is something shared with onions and with eggs. If there is a raw cut onion, if it's cooked, not relevant, only if it's raw. A raw cut onion cannot stay overnight unless the root is still attached to the onion, in which case it's fine. Or if someone added something to it like salt or oil. If it's an egg, you need the shell on. Any egg, raw or cooked, it doesn't make a difference. If it's out of its shell, it needs something else in it, like salt or oil or a piece of the shell. But if you peel the eggs, nothing's on them overnight, you got a problem.
So peeled eggs, not cut, just peeled, cannot stay in the refrigerator overnight.
They can, but then either put a piece of a shell on it or sprinkle a little salt or a little oil on it.
So just piece is enough.
Hey, if you have a tiny little piece of shell on that egg, that saved it.
On each egg.
On each egg. But if you have a bunch of eggs, just sprinkle on them salt or oil.
Are we allowed to peel eggs on Shabbos?
You're allowed to peel them because that's considered the natural way of eating. So something that's the natural way of eating is allowed to happen on Shabbos. Speaking about the idea of fish and meat, as long as the meat pot is clean, you can use it for fish, no problem. What you should not do is bake meat and fish in the oven at the same time. If you have a meat pot, it's clean, did not have any meat or meat residue in it for at least the last 24 hours. I can cook something pareve, like a vegetable, a potato, a beet, rice, noodles. I'm cooking them in a meat pot, but it's clean and hasn't been used for 24 hours. Those cooked vegetables are considered pareve, completely pareve. Now, if you have a meat pot that's clean, but it did have meat in it within the last 24 hours, I can cook my vegetables in it. I could cook my rice or my potatoes or my noodles or my corn. I cannot eat those vegetables with dairy. Those vegetables don't make me dairy. I can eat those vegetables and I am still pareve, but I cannot eat those vegetables with dairy because they were cooked in a pot that was 100% clean, but did have meat in it within the last 24 hours. Any questions on that one?
If the pot was clean for more than 24 hours, you can eat dairy with words?
Yes, you could. I boiled potatoes in that pot. I can eat those potatoes with dairy. Yes, I can.
And can you put this potato on dairy plate?
Yes, I can. Now, we don't usually do this because it's just so easy for people to get confused. You have your dairy pot and you cook your potatoes or your rice or your noodles in your dairy pot. But in theory, you can. So I'm not advising it. I would advise you to have enough dairy pots and enough meat pots that you can cook your potatoes that you're going to have with sour cream in a dairy pot and your potatoes that you're going to have with your steak in a meat pot. But literally the letter of the law is it's permissible. It's also advisable, talking about dairy and meat, to have two salt shakers, one for meat and one for dairy, because salt is something sharp. Salt pulls out the sharpness. So better you have a salt shaker for dairy, or a way that you put salt on your dairy foods and a separate way you put salt on your meat foods. And spices, you should either have spices for meat and dairy, or anytime you use the spices, you should never directly put them to a hot cooking dish. Meaning you might take a clean spoon and pour the spice onto a clean spoon and then pour that spoon into the pot or on the hot item. Because if you took your pepper and you poured it into your bubbling over chicken soup, then the steam from that chicken soup is going to go into the pepper shaker, and then that's now considered meat. Or you took anything, it doesn't have to be pepper. You took your garlic, you took your cinnamon, you took your paprika, you took any spice in your cabinet, and you pour it directly into a hot meat or hot dairy pot. Our concern is the steam goes into that item and makes it meat or dairy. So the best thing is either put it in a napkin, put it in your hand, put it in a spoon, and then put it in the pot.
Probably oil as well. If I have one container with oil and I pour it from this container into my pan.
Anything that you're pouring into hot, like a hot meat or a hot dairy, same concern of the steam.
Okay, thank you.
Let me do one more thing, which is bugs. According to the USDA laws, there could be a tremendous amount of bug and bug particles in our food that they say is acceptable. According to God, it's never acceptable. There is actually 6 different biblical transgressions in eating a bug. Bugs are absolutely forbidden according to Turen. And nowadays, there are so many bugs in all types of vegetables and fruits. When I was growing up, there weren't so many because there was a lot of very heavy-duty pesticides that were being used. Heavy-duty pesticides wipes out the bugs. But nowadays, they realize we don't want those heavy-duty pesticides, so they decided they'd rather have bugs. So there's a lot of bugs. What's infested? So many things. Almost all leafy vegetables, kale, mushrooms, strawberries are infested, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, herbs, artichokes, broccoli, asparagus, spinach, raspberries, blackberries, mulberries. So many things are really infested. According to Jewish law, any food that 10% or more of the species has insects is required to be checked before eaten. How do we check? There's different methods involving washing and soaking, using soap water or special rinses, using light boxes. There is a book you can get for free if you order it. The OK gives this out. It has very nice, clear color pictures how to check a lot of items. You could also go online. Almost any kosher certification agency today will tell you online how to check. Is there one way of checking? No, it depends what the item is. Some things I don't use. I don't use strawberries. Too hard to check. Just not worth it. I don't use most of the healthiest leafy green vegetables. I don't trust my eyesight. Too hard to check. But they're easier than strawberries. Strawberries and raspberries are the worst of the worst of the worst in terms of bugs. So do I have to be careful? Everybody eats strawberries. It's a fruit. Yeah, it's a fruit, but there's 6 biblical transgressions of eating a bug. Everyone can take a little upgrade. You might say, whoa, I don't even keep kosher. What here was relevant to me? Maybe you can start thinking, what's the relevancy? How can you apply this in your own life? We are what we eat. We want to, as much as possible, be God aligned and God refined. And the more we eat the way God wants, the more transparent we can be literally with our bodies to his will.